Good morning, everyone. It is Monday of week number 6. So let's get going and see what we've got happening this week because there's a lot going on. So last week you learned about DNA, the importance of deoxyribonucleic acid, how it replicates. You also learned about mitosis, which is a type of cell division where one cell makes exact copies of itself. And you also learned about transcription and translation, which are processes by which DNA produces proteins. And most of those proteins are enzymes. The importance of this is that enzymes run all the biochemistry in cells. So that's the importance of DNA. DNA makes the enzymes that runs the biochemistry. For this week, you're going to learn about different types of reproduction, some inheritance, and also some biodiversity. Read through, or at least please skim through the chapters 11, 12, and 47 in your OpenStax textbook. Then read Module 6, the overview, and watch the videos on meiosis and epigenetics, especially the epigenetics because this is coming up in your discussion board postings. So your discussion board postings are about epigenetics, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute on a couple of extra slides that I have. And nature versus nurture. How much of the individual is produced by way of the genes that are present in cells or by the environment? Does our genetics shape who we are or does our environment? So we'll talk about that again in a minute. Your journal entry, because that's what you have to do this week along with the discussion board posts, are about how bacteria reproduce. They reproduce by binary fission, which you're going to explain to me. Binary fission means two binary fission split. They just split in two. That's really simple, a simple type of asexual reproduction. But the thing is, because they asexually reproduce, they still have to have a way to get new DNA. And they do, and they are very efficient at it. They have mutation, conjugation, transformation, and transduction. These are all found in Chapter 22.A, so that's Section 2 of Chapter 22. You can find a full description of this in this chapter and this section. So please go there and read that and answer correctly because all the information is right there in front of you. You'll talk about asexual versus sexual reproduction, benefits to each, drawbacks to each, so that will be important. Biodiversity is extremely important because there has to be variation in individuals in a population in order for that species to continue. And why is that? And we're talking about even bacteria. Bacteria all the way up to human beings if you consider us the greatest species. So anyway, every species has to have variation in a population. Why is that? Because there's no telling what environmental stressor is going to come along that could wipe out most of the population. You've got to have variety in the individuals, in their looks, in the cell type, in the resistance to factors outside, the ability to deal with stress, the ability to deal with environmental conditions like temperature changes and different chemicals that come along and all sorts of things. You have to have that variety in order for some members of the species to survive. So we need biodiversity in order for species to survive. That's just tremendously important. And if not, species will die out. We find this problem in a species like the cheetah, where all the cheetahs that are left in the world are basically genetically identical. And so there's probably going to come along some stressor that will wipe out all of them. And that's what you get when you have no genetic diversity in the species itself. And then you're also going to cover genetic erosion in agriculture. And this refers to losing species of livestock, losing species of crop plants, because in huge farming operations, you only want one type of cow that you're dealing with. You don't want them to interbreed. they have different needs and different requirements and all that sort of thing. And that's true with crops too, right? You want vast crops of corn or vast crops of wheat because that's what you can grow in your environment. And you will choose one particular subspecies of this because that's going to work where you are. Well, what does that lead to then? That means that we're losing species of livestock, species of crop plants. Where are they going? They're just dying out. So is this good? No, it's not, because what if the environment changes? We know about global warming. We know the environment is changing. So what are we going to do about it? I want to just remark that there are heirloom varieties that are still around. Should we keep these? There are things like seed banks. Have you ever heard of a seed bank? There's seed banks where all different types of plants have their seeds stored so that we can go back and get those seeds and plant them and have those particular plants if we ever want to grow those again. And then finally, we have the slides for your final project. It is terribly important that this week you go back and look at the graded rubrics for the 3 milestones. I will try to grade milestone 3 as fast as I can this week so that you can get started with that. But go back and fix your milestones. And then next week you can put slides together of all of those milestones and make your final project, because that'll be the one thing that you have due next week. I cannot stress how important this final project is. If you have looked at how many points this counts toward your final grade, you will see how important it is. It's about a quarter of your grade. But you've already done the work in the milestones. If you will just go back and correct those and do what you need to do to fix whatever issues are there, then you'll have a great final project. So let's delve into a few of the topics that I mentioned already. Hang on just a second. Okay. So we have DNA, and DNA is made up of genes. So we have long, long molecules of DNA, but then there are segments or parts of the DNA that code for genes. And genes determine the traits that you have. And I have 3 different traits right here that I just wanted to mention. So we have a man with Marfan syndrome, which is a dominant trait, the man who is very tall. You may have heard of some basketball players that have Marfan syndrome, because there have been some. And that's because these people grow extremely tall. Now, they have a lot of trouble with their backs and their legs because their bones are so big and so long. They have very big feet, very big hands, which makes them great for basketball. But like I said, they do have trouble with their muscles in their skeleton, their bones and their joints, because they are so tall. The other problem that they have is that their aorta is weak and it can burst. And your aorta is the artery that runs from your heart out into your tissues, carries blood out, oxygenated blood out into your tissue. So if that bursts open, you know, all your good blood is spilling out and none of your tissues are getting oxygenated. So that's a very bad thing that can happen. Down on the right-hand corner, you see an example of sickled cells, and I know that you've heard of sickle cell anemia. So these are some cells that have sickled out. You see the sharp pointy ends on them. That's not the way that red blood cells are supposed to look. They're supposed to look like the little oval one that you see right there sort of in the middle. When they sickle out like this under low oxygen conditions, then they get stuck in the capillaries. And that means that the tissues that those capillaries were feeding don't get oxygenated and the tissues can die. Sickle cell anemia is a recessive trait. And then we have another recessive trait represented on the left-hand bottom corner by the little boy who doesn't have any melanin production in his skin and hair, and most likely his eyes too. Albinism is a recessive trait also. So those are different traits that you get in your genes sometimes, and we have all different types of genes. Epigenetics, I do want to mention what this is. Epi means above, and so this is something that is happening that is above the genetic level. So your genes determine what your traits are, right? But think about it this way. You have the exact same DNA in all the cells in all of your body except for your sex cells, the ones that make eggs and sperm, okay? You have different DNA there because you have less. But in all the rest of the cells, you have exactly the same DNA, 46 chromosomes, it is all there. Then why does a heart muscle cell look totally different from a nerve cell, look totally different from a skin cell? You get it? You know, there are lots of different cells in your body. So why do they look different from each other if they have exactly the same DNA in them? It depends on which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off in your cells. This is epigenetics. What is controlling the genes? What's controlling the turning on and turning off of genes? This determines the characteristics of the cell. So, there are plenty of things that do this control. There are other genes that we have that turn on and produce proteins that turn on and off genes. But there are also environmental factors that can do this. So that's interesting. Stress, for example, can turn on and off genes because you just load up on all kinds of stress hormones and chemicals throughout your body, and they turn on and off genes. Environmental pollutants can turn on and off genes, and there are just a lot of things that can turn on and off genes. Now, how important is this? Just think what we could do if we understood and could control epigenetics. What if we could turn on and off genes in the DNA? We could take some of your skin cells, grow them in culture, turn on the right genes, make you a new heart if you've had a heart attack. We could take your skin cells, grow them in culture, turn on the cells to make spinal cord, and you could cure someone who is paralyzed. You could take cancer cells and you could turn them off. How about that? And so you wouldn't have cancer anymore. If you could do this inside the body, get to those cancer cells and turn off the cell replication genes, you could cure cancer. There are so many things that we could do if we could understand epigenetics and control it. And so this is a very active area of research in genetics right now, epigenetics. You're going to talk about the nature versus nurture question. So how much of your personhood, how much of an organism is determined by the genes that are present, and how much is determined by the environment? That is a really interesting question. It's been around for a long time. It's caused people to do a lot of crazy, awful things because they'll say, well, you're a certain race or you're a certain religion. We need to get rid of you because, you know, everything about you is in your genes, and so we want to wipe out those genes. We've had a lot of awful things that have happened in history because of this idea. So you're going to discuss this, and it is really important because how much of you is really determined by your genes and how much is determined by your environmental factors. I'm going to post a video of some identical twins who were separated at birth, and you look at it, watch it, and see what you think about it. It's two grown women, and they found each other since they've been adults. So they were raised totally separate. They didn't even know about each other. How are they the same? How are they different? It's very interesting to examine this and to look at twin studies. There have been all kinds of these done through the years. It's very interesting to think about and to talk about. So you will be doing that. The importance of sexual reproduction. I pulled this picture off of the internet of the Duggar family, and you know, everybody knows about the Duggar family. They have lots and lots of children. 19, I think now. Anyway, here's a picture of them. So the mother and the father produced all of these children, except for the one wife in there. But anyway, they produced all of these children. And if you look at the children, they actually do look different from each other. Okay. But the same mother and father produced them. Isn't there a chance that they would produce one of the same offspring again later on? No, not really. Because if you understand meiosis and how chromosomes separate when eggs and sperm are formed, and then what happens when you put together the different combinations between the mother and the father, there are 8 million different combinations produced by human parents. 8 million. So what are the chances that one of these offspring is going to be the same as another one that came along later? Not very good. But the point is that, yes, they look different. But the other thing that you need to realize is that the biochemistry of these individuals is different. So have you ever known anyone who hated cilantro? They said, ooh, cilantro tastes like soap. Why would you eat it? Well, I love cilantro. My sister hates cilantro because it tastes like soap to her. She tastes sucralose, and she says it tastes like chlorine, like pool water or something. I taste it. It tastes sweet to me. We have the same parents. We were raised the same, but our biochemistry is different. And why is that important? That's the really important part of being different offspring when you do sexual reproduction. There has to be differences between the offspring in order for the species to survive. This is mixing up of genes from the mother and the father, and you get different offspring. And hopefully, you're hoping as a species that some of those individuals will survive no matter what kind of stressor comes along that might kill some of them. And this is true even in bacteria. Bacteria, plants, animals, a fungus, a slime mold that's growing in the forest. We all do sexual reproduction, and we do this for a purpose, to produce different types of offspring so that at least some of them will survive no matter what the stressor is that comes along in the environment. And then finally, we have biodiversity. Because of sexual reproduction, and most organisms do it, but not all, because of sexual reproduction and the different ways that even the asexually reproducing organisms can change their DNA, this results in differences in individuals in a population. And like I said, that allows for survival of species. Then you also have to have diversity amongst the different organisms in an ecosystem so that you get every niche filled in that ecosystem, every role played, every food source produced, every predator produced. You have to have biodiversity in order to have a healthy ecosystem, which we will learn more about in the coming weeks. So that's also coming, even though it is part of this week. How does it develop? Partially by sexual reproduction. So I hope you have a wonderful week. And as always, if you need anything, I'm here for you. m.sigmon@snhu.edu. I am here for you. Just email me, drop me a note. I will answer you. I will help you with anything that I can. So please ask if you need some help. And as always, have a great week.